All right, so we're back. Our first conversation with Evangelos Simoudis of Synapse Partners. His blog is at corporateinnovation.co. We're recording this on the morning of January 9th, 2026. The references that we'll be citing can be found in the episode notes on the dataexchange.media. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you are listening to this on a podcast, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so topic number one, Evangelos, and to a lesser extent, I have been following the Consumer Electronics Show, the big conference in Las Vegas this week. And so we want to cover some of the key takeaways. So, Evangelos, key observation or key takeaway number one is?
It was a humanoids conference. Okay, so a couple of things that's to put some meat around the bone here. There were humanoids everywhere. Were about over 30 companies exhibiting humanoids, most of them Chinese. We have a few Korean and even fewer US based. I think to me, a couple of things that came up. First of all, I think it was a lot of impressions, a lot of demos. Many of them were teleoperated. I still did not see a lot of them that I can envision being part of a real environment. I also think that I was surprised at how many. I organized humanoids under the general category of adaptive robots, and I thought we are overemphasizing humanoids compared to the overall category of adaptive. The thing that also kind of surprised me, it was, I call it the magnificence of the hand. So many of these robots have several degrees of freedom. I think the largest was probably about 20 degrees of freedom, but they're still not able to get the hand to operate in every environment, and that's because of all the sensors that we have in our human hands. So that points to the work that needs to be done. The other thing is that we call them kind of like autonomous, but it wasn't. As I said, all of them were teleoperated and have their minders nearby. I haven't seen a lot of real applications, right? We think about, I had written a paper about applications to the automotive industry and to the assembly line in general. I'm not certain how close we are to that. There are implications both ways. There are both implications on what still needs to be done to the robot, but also we need to be thinking very carefully what it means to the human in the assembly line. So I will end my remark. I'll let you talk for a minute with Hyundai saying that they're going to start manufacturing, I think over the next couple of years, up to 30,000 such robots. They exhibited the Atlas, which has been in development for many years. They're now working with Google on Atlas. They said that they're going to introduce it even in the factory that they're going to build in Georgia. Which actually I think this is an interesting development to me, because if we have been thinking about, especially the administration, it has been thinking about these new investments by the global automotive industry being done in the U.S. and being the source of large employment opportunities. I think that if these automakers start introducing this type of robotics, the employment numbers are going to be curtailed. So I'll stop here. We can go as deeply as you want.
So a couple of quick observations. One, as I commented to you before we started recording, Rodney Brooks just came out with his massive essay. I don't know, it's several thousand words, but there's a big section on robotics. And then he lists out 10 observations about humanoid robots. And for people who don't know, Rodney Brooks is one of these elder statesmen of robotics, but he's very much still active with a new startup. But he has some really key observations in his post that we will link to. And I guess my other question to you, Evangelos, is you said there were so many companies, right? So are these so these companies, I'm assuming, are venture funded. So what are the investors thinking? Are they thinking that they're going to get a return on these investments?
So I am not certain whether all of the companies are venture funded. So here's an example. Hyundai is, as I said, it's not venture funded. But I believe that what we've seen, particularly during 2025, is a significant influx of venture capital into these companies like Figure, Aptronic, 1X. And there are 4 or 5 European companies, a couple of them in Germany.
And specifically, the investors are investing in humanoid robots?
In humanoid. These are all the names that I mentioned are all developers of humanoid robots of different form factors. But
so you're if you're an investor, you're thinking what?
Well, you see, I actually believe that many of them are thinking shiny object. Here is something that captures our imagination. Obviously, Elon Musk with Optimus and Tesla and claiming that he can turn Tesla into an adaptive robotics company. That is attracting a lot of attention. Obviously, Musk has a big group of followers. I don't believe that a lot of folks a lot of the investors have thought about the broad implication on applications. We talk about manufacturing, we talk about logistics. A lot of the investor presentations we've seen in this topic always mention Amazon with its robotics in the distribution centers. But again, there isn't a very broad set of applications that has been explored to some extent. And the last point I'll make here is that I was listening to an interview by the CEO of 1X. 1X makes this more consumer-oriented humanoid. And he admitted that today there is a teleoperator for most of these activities, and the range of activities that his company's robots are able to do is still very, very narrow, very small. So we have a very, very long way to go, and I encourage the listeners to try to at least skim through Rodney's blog post, because here's somebody with close to 30-year experience
40 or 50 years.
Actually, for this type of robots, I think he goes back to about 98. And anyway, it's he makes some very, very good points, which I believe are worthwhile both for investors to understand, but also for the people who work in these kind of companies and people who want to start these kind of companies, entrepreneurs who want to start these kind of companies.
All right. So what's your second takeaway or observation?
So the second takeaway relates to software-defined vehicles and AI, and this is something that obviously I have written a lot about. My last book was The Flagship Experience, was all about software-defined vehicles and AI. So a couple of things to say there. First of all, I think the influence of Chinese is being felt, and companies are now openly talking about developing software-defined vehicles and bringing them to market. I mean, I'm talking about.
By the way, you may want to give us a one-sentence definition of software-defined vehicles for our listeners.
Yeah, so software-defined vehicle is one where the hardware of the vehicle and the software are cleanly separated, and a lot of the functionality of the vehicle is defined by software. Tesla is obviously, for those of us living in the US, Tesla is probably a prototypical example of a software-defined vehicle. Rivian is another one. But as time has gone on, we're seeing not only an increasing number of software-defined vehicles entering the market, even a number of GM vehicles now can be considered software-defined. But more importantly, and again, this is going to be a kind of a corollary of in the book, I talk about if we want to have a true software-defined vehicle, we really need to be thinking about what are called zonal architectures. And again, what we saw in this year's CES is companies starting with BMW, starting Rivian just before that, openly talking about transitioning from the first iteration of these software-defined architectures, which were domain-based, as they're called, to zonal. And the biggest advantage that zonal provide is, number one, we have fewer hardware components, with each one with a lot more computing, though. And the second thing is that a bigger percentage of the vehicle can be updated over the air. Again, to the consumer to date, the biggest indication that they have a software-defined vehicle is that certain functions of the vehicle can be updated over the air, right? And in the more advanced software-defined vehicles, particularly those that are based on zonal architectures, upwards of 80% of the vehicle can be updated over the air. So software-defined, a lot of software-defined vehicles and a lot of announcements. So that's point number one. Second point, which again, it's about this book again that I wrote, is AI in the cabin. So far we've been talking about AI around the autonomy of the vehicle, right? How autonomous are the vehicle's capabilities? But now we're starting to see a lot more AI in the cabin. I would point to Mercedes, for example, announcing collaboration with both Google and Microsoft to work on agents that deal with the interaction between cabin occupant and vehicle. BMW announced a relationship with Alexa Plus, actually, and many others. Here had a number of Hyundai obviously has done a lot of work in that area. Here made announcements. So again, there was a lot of AI in the cabin.
What about Apple? Was Apple a presence in this category at the conference? No.
No, Apple never comes to CES, and also I think Apple's play, right? It's going to be around CarPlay. We'll see where they go with it, but at least in the announcements that automakers made relating to AI in the cabin, there was no mention of Apple. I think everybody offers CarPlay in their vehicles now, but or almost everyone, but not from the perspective of AI. The last point I will make here, which again comes around autonomy in the vehicle, and the autonomy I saw kind of like, I will break it in two parts.
And this what you're about to say is about things that got announced at the conference.
Yeah. So there was emphasis in personal autonomous vehicles as opposed to what we know as robotaxis, right? And again, we can talk about robotaxis because there were some announcements there as well. But there was a lot more discussion and announcements relating to how do I offer fully autonomous, level 4 autonomous vehicles for personal use. I think that a lot of that is motivated again by what Tesla wants to do. But the biggest announcement on that front was NVIDIA, which again announced their model, and also they deepened their relationship with Mercedes. That relationship dates significant number of years. And then Ford came out and said, well, we're going to have a level 3 autonomous vehicle by 2028 for a very low price. I mean, the low price meaning around $30,000. And we can talk about these implications. But again, to me, those were important announcements. One last thing to say before I forget, because I know that both you and I are open source fans. There was an announcement by 30 automakers and tier 1 suppliers for a consortium, in a sense, to develop open source software for software-defined vehicles. And I think if they can pull it off, I think that would be a very good thing for the industry.
All right. So how about one last takeaway from CES?
I will.
If you don't have one, I have one.
To me, the takeaway, and again, I'm sorry to make it a little bit self-serving, is that in my second book, Transportation Transformation, I was talking about the various models that we will see as robotaxis come to market. And I think that, in the Zoox, Uber, and Waymo were in the conference, and we're seeing different models emerge between Waymo having the full stack, from the technology to offering the service, Uber partnering with Waymo, but also developing its own vehicles. But its own vehicles are being developed through partnership with Nuro and Lucid, right? So you have all of these different models, which I wrote back in 2020, and I found it very rewarding, if you will, seeing now all of them coming to fruition 6 years later.
All right. So I guess before we move on to the next topic, one observation I had, and this is not actually unique, is that it seems like the major chip providers are also at CES, right? So NVIDIA had an announcement there around the Rubin platform. AMD had some announcements around Ryzen and ROCm, and then even Intel was there.
And Qualcomm.
Qualcomm.
Look, the fact is that as the vehicle becomes more intelligent, both in the cabin and for its autonomous operation, a lot more computing is necessary. That computing, by the way, has kind of like similar needs to, we were talking earlier about adaptive robotics, as opposed to what we see as LLMs and whatever. But again, if we want to offer intelligence in the cabin, we need to worry a lot about edge AI, and edge AI means specific kind of chips that operate within the vehicle and have certain power characteristics and have certain inference characteristics. And we saw a lot of that. Qualcomm's partnership with BMW is as important as NVIDIA's partnership with Mercedes.
And we'll have to devote maybe one of these segments to the state of autonomous vehicles, maybe next month, because that requires a longer discussion. All right. So the second topic is around the export controls, specifically for NVIDIA's H200 line of chips. So the reason I bring this up is in early December, the Trump administration announced relaxation of the previous policy under the Biden administration. So the funny thing about this, I put together a graphic that basically summarizes comprehensively the arguments for and against these export controls on Monday afternoon, to put it in my newsletter on Tuesday. So on Monday afternoon, I started Googling around for the official policy. And believe it or not, I don't think there's a written document. So in a traditional US administration, you have an announcement like this. Usually the White House will have a document which lays it out. But here, every article that is written about this just refers to a Truth Social post. So as best as we can tell, the policy is that there's some relaxation. The export controls will be relaxed, and the U.S. will take a cut in terms of the revenue from the export controls, right? So that's, as best I can tell, the state of the policy. The second thing I would say is that since then, in fact, as of this week, the Chinese themselves, the Chinese authorities have told local companies to stop ordering these chips. Basically, they want Chinese companies to purchase domestic AI chips instead of foreign options. So there's a bit of confusion in terms of what's going to happen or how impactful these policies are, given that the Chinese themselves may dissuade their own companies from importing these chips.
So,
And like I said, so I have a graphic that lays out the arguments for and against, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I would say I would pick out a couple of the arguments that I think the proponents for lifting the export controls cite the most often. One is kind of this addiction, the addiction element, or making sure people use U.S. tools, right? So that's one of the key arguments. If you prevent Chinese companies from using U.S. chips, then they may use domestic chips, which will hurt the U.S. Companies moving forward. But a couple of things to say there. One is, as I said, the Chinese themselves are telling their companies not to use these chips. And then secondly, even in the West, there seems to be, Evangelos, a psychological breakthrough in the last few months around NVIDIA's chips, given that Google announced Gemini 3 was trained completely on TPUs.
TPUs, yeah.
Yeah, and then Cerebras now has viable chips for inference, and AMD is investing more and more in their software stack, ROCm. So maybe the addiction argument is less compelling. I guess the second argument is, if you give them controlled access, then the local chip industry in China will progress more slowly, because basically, why would the Chinese companies use the domestic chips? So if they have access to better chips, in which case the Chinese companies, Chinese chip manufacturers won't improve. But as I said, the Chinese government themselves are kind of, I guess, seeding this flywheel, domestic flywheel for their own chips. So maybe that argument is moot. And probably another argument that I would say is the most annoying argument is this argument from NVIDIA, which is basically, we need to preserve our leadership because we need the revenue that we get from China feeds into our R&D, and so therefore we need the. But then, as people point out, look, local Western companies and even the U.S. government can't get enough NVIDIA chips, so you have enough revenue without going to China, right? To fund your R&D.
So let me.
I'll stop there. And like I said, the graphic lays out all the pros and cons, right?
So I think that, I think you laid it out very nicely, and I will add a couple of comments. China has stated through Xi Jinping has stated that they want to be self-sufficient on technology. We'll see what their next 5-year plan, which will be announced towards March, I'm sorry, will state. But I believe that whether we give them free access to the NVIDIA or chips from other semiconductor manufacturers, I think China wants to develop its own semiconductor industry, and GPUs being one category of chips that they want. So I think our actions, particularly the West's actions, because it involves ASML as well, which is a Dutch company. I think the West's actions definitely slowing things down, but I think that China is determined by hook or by crook to develop its own advanced semiconductor capability. The second point is that, and this is something that we in the West have started to realize, especially those of us who are at the forefront of AI applications, is you can do a lot with small language models. And it is very important to be developing vertical models of reasonable size as opposed to always relying on foundation models. There's no question, very much like we have a few search engines, there will be a need for a few, I do not know whether it is 2, 3, 4, but for some small number of foundation models. And we'll see how we monetize, by the way, these models. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But I think small language models are going to start becoming far more prominent in the thinking of AI users, enterprise or even consumers. The last point I will make is that we're also starting to see, and this is something that you and I have discussed extensively privately, we're starting to see that we can make optimizations to our existing models and their follow-ons that can be addressed through the existing semiconductor technology. So in other words, we don't always need to have the latest and greatest GPU or TPUs in order to achieve the goals that we've set off. And that's because we're starting to understand better how these models work, how they can be fine-tuned, what is the advantages of the fine-tuning, and how the existing capability, computing capability that we have can be fully utilized without having to go to the latest and greatest, the most advanced. Let me add one last point, which I didn't hear in your remarks, which is I am, I don't know if I would call it concern, but I'm definitely intrigued by the open source model strategy that China has adopted.
Open weights.
Open weights, sometimes even open data. But again, to me, it's a form of open source models, right? And how this approach, how these models are being adopted and adapted, right? Because they're open to some extent. So I think that if these models work well and they don't need the most advanced computing capability, then I think companies like NVIDIA will face some headwinds, right? I'm not saying that they will be dramatically slowed down, but again, this is something that we need to pay attention to and determine whether we embrace it or not. But again, I point to that because I see now, even in enterprises, this type of use of this type of models, at least in their prototype. I do not know if they will decide to deploy them. But if you develop a prototype through an open source Chinese model that you download it and you have it on premise, or you have it in some Western data center, then as you fine tune that and you want to go to production, it's unlikely that you will switch to a different model. So anyway, I mean, I just wanted to bring that as a last remark.
Yeah. So I guess let me close by citing the arguments of the people for the export controls, right? So one is that if you do this unilaterally, the U.S. without coordinating with your allies, then that weakens your argument to the Netherlands or to Japan, right? So,
Right.
secondly, they will say, you basically, by unilaterally softening the export controls without really giving up anything, this is basically a main point of your leverage that you ceded without actually gaining any advantage. And then third, they point out we don't know the military applications from the most leading edge frontier models, right? So
Mhm.
set aside the small models that maybe you deploy in the edge, but the leading edge models, we don't know as they get better who has an advantage. And then finally, they point out that there is a true advantage in terms of the chips. And in fact, Huawei's own internal roadmap points their share of chips being used in this area at about 5% this year. And even Huawei projects it will decline to 2% by 2027, right? So there still remains an advantage. So uh, the US should, make sure that while they have that advantage, they can exploit it, right? So, like I said, so I will link to the graphic which I put together, which lays this out. But this is a complicated issue, and I think that we probably should have a much more formal policy than a post on Truth Social.
Yeah, I think that the
Yeah,
two sides are feeling each other right now,
yeah,
while the technology is advancing very quickly on both sides, we should add.
yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, and,
again,
and, and I agree with you on the open weights ecosystem. I think that is an area where the Chinese have really rushed to fill in a gap. The US leading frontier model labs, while they all release open weights models, that clearly is a secondary priority, right? So
right,
uh, the Allen AI lab in Seattle has released a true open source model, right? So with
right,
open weights, open
with open
data,
data, right,
the actual code to train the model, and so on and so forth. So yeah, on the open ecosystem, uh, yeah, something the West will need to do something there. And with that, thank you, Evangelos.
and